This is Analyzing Coded Data with MAXQDA. I know most of you, but for those who don't know me, my name is Michael Gizzi. I'm a professor of criminal justice. I'm a political scientist. By training, I teach at Illinois State University in Normal, Illinois, about 2 hours south of Chicago. Professional trainer for MAXQDA. I do consultations and workshops on a variety of tools, and co-editor of the brand new, newly released book with Dr. Stefan Rodecker of the practice of qualitative data analysis, research examples using MAXQDA. You can reach me at mgizzi@gmail.com. Today's webinar is meant to help you think through the ways of analyzing coded data with MAXQDA. We're going to use a current project, and we're going to walk through the steps that I tend to use and explore some of the issues that you might encounter. We'll be guided by my pedagogical model of the 4 stages of research, although I won't spend a lot of time on that today. A conceptual model I use with undergrads who are new to both qualitative analysis and working with MAXQDA. But what we're doing today isn't necessarily limited to just new users. Anyone can benefit from this. What I will be demonstrating is one approach for analyzing qualitative data, not the only approach. I don't claim to have found the key to the best way of doing it. What I have found, though, is that this model, this approach, works for me. And hopefully from exploring this, you'll find something that will work for you. Now, maybe you're nowhere near analyzing your project data, but it's still useful to be thinking about this from the very beginning. So, some assumptions kind of for setting the stage for today. You've got a project. You've identified the research questions that will guide that study. You've developed a coding system, either deductively or inductively or both. I think it's usually both. Kind of the things we talked about last week and the week before. You've coded your documents. You've written memos. You've added code comments to annotate segments, etc. You might have paraphrased. You've gone through all the documents, and you think you're ready to make sense of your data. So how do you do it? How do you begin? Well, as I said, the 4 stages model. This week's session, really, we're down in stage 4. You've identified the guiding questions. You've created your workspace. You've built the code book. You've content analyzed. Now we are at what I like to call the art of data analysis. Let's see here. I will just very quickly go through each of those stages super quick. So you'd identified your guiding principles, you have a research question, you've determined that qualitative analysis is appropriate. This was all the stuff we did in the last webinar series. You've developed a workflow, you've got a research workspace, you've identified documents, begun to build codes, you've created a coding system, you've coded your data. Now we are ready to begin analyzing. Analyzing data, to me, begins with summarizing the data. Looking to see what the data looks like, the distribution of codes, the frequencies of them. We're going to, you're going to want to look for patterns perhaps, or maybe themes. You may want, even though it's qualitative, you may probably want to quantify your findings, identify good examples. And there's a whole slew of tools available to you. This graphic illustrates a couple things. One, it suggests that this is not a linear process. You're going to go back and forth many times. Two, MAXQDA offers a whole lot of tools. You're probably not going to use them all. Over time, you will determine what tools sort of work for you and try to figure out how to kind of push those forward. So the project that we're going to look at today is one that I've been working on with a student or two students really for the whole year. It's a study that comes out of American law. We are looking at the way courts in the United States interpret and comply with our high court, our Supreme Court, in terms of policy decisions. And this is a study that involves a case which placed limits on police ability to gain information or conduct searches involving data from what we call third parties, from banks or phone companies or internet providers uh, uh, or content providers like Google or Yahoo, online forums. And in 2018, the Supreme Court handed down a case that said that police could no longer gain information from a provider, from a cell phone provider, tracking tower logs, kind of complete surveillance based on where your phone is, without what in the US we call a search warrant, legal basis to conduct a search. Now, I know not all countries have that, but this doesn't really matter for us because I just want you to have a very quick understanding of what we're doing. So the decision came 3 years ago, 2018. We used a legal database, and ultimately we identified 231 lower court decisions from all courts all across the country, both federal courts and state courts, that have interpreted and applied the new precedent. They either applied it or they distinguished it from that original precedent. We downloaded all of these cases as Microsoft Word files. We've imported them into MAXQDA. We used MAXQDA to conduct a literature review on this doctrine that we call the third-party doctrine. Again, not really important for you, but just sort of giving you the background. And we developed a series of exploratory research questions we wanted to explore. We wanted to know how lower courts interpreted the Supreme Court's policy, to see how that lower courts suggested it related to other third-party doctrine issues beyond the acquiring cell phone tower logs data. We wanted to know what the nature of third-party doctrine surveillance tools are that have been used by police by doing this deep dive through these 231 cases. We wanted to determine what types of crimes do these cases involve. We wanted to look at legal doctrines. So these all became the basis of a pretty complex research project. Again, the project's described in a little bit more clearly in chapter 4 of the book. We developed a coding system. We referred to our literature review to identify core concepts we wanted to explore. Some of these codes we already knew what we were going to include because two of us anyways, knew the legal theories quite well. These codes were created, the initial codes were created deductively, meaning they were drawn from theory. We didn't even import them, we just created them using the new code tool. We organized them. We then paraphrased many cases to identify other core concepts, And then we used the smart coding tool to inductively build a complete coding system. After we did that, we had to reorganize the code system as well. We had to clean it up. So once done, we read each opinion. We coded them using the coding system. The bulk of the coding was done by one graduate student. I did some of it, and then we did some intercoder reliability issues as well. So we've coded the data. We're ready to, what do? Well, as I said, I like to start with descriptive information. I want to gain an overview of my data. So in many ways in this project, there were two main things that we initially wanted to explore. What tools police were using to gain evidence, and what were the nature of the crimes where they were using these tools. Everyone assumes every crime in the U.S. is a drug crime, and well, that sometimes is true. It's kind of an oversimplification. So where do we begin with? What tool would we use first? Well, I think we would begin with code frequencies. It's almost always my go-to, my starting point for coding a project. Select one or more codes, see how frequently they appear, activate codes, add the codes to the code frequency dialogues, or drag them into it. Decide what results you, when the results appear, whether you want to view documents with the code or segments the code is used. For this project, I'm almost always interested in a document level of analysis. I don't care if a code is coded 3 times in a document. All I care is that it's in the document or not, or the case. We can view the data either as a table or a chart. And we can even export that and use it in a memo or in a presentation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you some output, and then I'll switch to MAXQDA and we'll go back and forth. So I use code frequencies. I go to analysis, I select code frequencies. In this instance, I was interested in the crimes. I inserted these crimes. It generated this table. That table was really interesting because in this early view of the data, and this presentation is really drawn on an early view of it, you'll notice there were, can't read it clearly here, but there were 19 documents that weren't coded for crimes, and every case should have had a crime. And so that required us to do a little bit of sleuthing and figuring out what was missing. I actually described this process in greater depth. But analyzing data sometimes is also, the early steps of it is making sure your data is complete. I can view this as a table showing me the distribution of cases with percentages. And I can view it as a chart in numerous ways. I can export or copy the data. If it's in a chart form, it'll copy the graphic. If it's in a table form, it will copy the table. I can even turn it into a memo and save it. So let me and so what I'm going to do is I would repeat this process for, in many ways, many of the codes that I'm interested in, getting a sense of what my data looks like. So, I want to see the breakdown between cases involving different police evidence gathering tools and the legal doctrines at play. So, here are the legal doctrines at play. I do a code frequency based on my data. It shows me, a few things that make total sense for me in understanding this data. Things that I can write about. Or I can see what tools were being used. Half of the cases involve cell phone tower data. Makes sense. That's what the Supreme Court decision was about. So I'm going to switch. We're in MAXQDA. This is the complete project data file. There are actually more cases than there were at the time I did that earlier presentation. You can see we have state cases. Documents look like this. They're coded. On the right side, paraphrase. I don't know if this document got paraphrased. It's a state case. We didn't paraphrase as much then. So you'll see codes. You'll see paraphrasing that was done beforehand. You will see here our coding system. It's organized. Oh, that was a one I added later. Don't worry about that. It is organized in terms of our types of crimes and our surveillance tools, and then our legal doctrines. So these are the three kind of the main areas. So I begin my analysis. I'm interested in what were the crimes. I'm going to begin by doing this. I'm going to activate crime groups. I'm going to go to analysis, code frequencies. Oh, sorry, I did this before the session. And since I've activated those codes, I can insert the activated codes. You'll notice this parent code here, crime groups, has nothing coded because it's literally just an organizational code. I'll eliminate that because I don't really want any data on it. So now I have the crimes. I click OK. And now I have my code frequencies. You'll notice here, this is the final version. All the documents have been coded, all 231. Shows me the percentage breakdown. Now, to be honest with you, this number here and these numbers here are going to be somewhat similar, but that's okay. I can choose between documents with codes and segments with codes. But again, for me, I'm interested in documents. I can switch to a graphic mode. So what we see here is we have our 27% of our cases were homicide or murder cases, 26.8% involved drugs, 24% robbery, 18% were other crimes, and 17% were cases involving sexual misconduct, basically child pornography for the most part, or sexual misconduct cases as well, but mostly pornography, property cases. The other crimes include a whole bunch of different types of crimes that we just we lump together. I can copy this to the clipboard. And in the clipboard, I can paste it in. Unfortunately, one of the limitations when you copy a graphic into a MAXQDA memo is it doesn't maintain the same graphic quality. But if you exported that into Microsoft Word or as a graphic file, it would be at the full resolution. You can switch back. One of the things I like to do with my data, I did it already, crap, is I like to copy the data as a table. And then since this is the frequency of all of these cases, I like to go into the crime groups itself and go to a memo where I would do this. Pretend it's not there. Paste in and this is a code memo, but that code memo is providing me with really good information, so I don't have to go back to the code frequencies again. I can easily access it at any point in time, and I can even hover over it and see the data on the fly. So analysis code frequencies is a starting point. I'll show you another way of doing it. I won't bother doing them all. If I was interested in just certain types of codes, I can just drag them in and then create the codes. Hopefully this is making sense. So, code frequencies is a start. Don't forget, write as you go, create memos, record your findings as you dig through your data. Sometimes in our next steps, we'll have the opportunity, if there are coded segments that we're interested in and you hadn't added a comment to them, you could annotate them right on the fly. Writing isn't just something you do at the end. Writing is something you do throughout the qualitative process using MAXQDA. Think of it as your toolbox. Okay? Good. So we've looked at that data. The next step is, how do codes interact? Where do they co-occur? Now, in some studies, you might be interested in what codes they intersect with or their proximity to other codes in a document. I don't. And for this project, that's not what I'm doing. My second go-to tool is the code relations browser. My second step in this sort of systematic approach is the code relations browser. I could also use code configurations, which will show the combination of codes and documents, and I will demonstrate that for you. But code relations browser is the tool that I use probably more than anything, and it will provide us with a launching point into analyzing data. So the code relations browser is available under brain fart. Visual tools, code relations browser. The code relations browser lets us see the co-occurrence of different coded data. When you click on the tool, it will bring up a dialog box. You set the rows and the columns. In this instance, I'm setting it to all activated codes because I don't want to see all of the codes. There's like 60 or 80 of them. Okay. I just want the codes that I'm looking at right now. And for columns, I like to choose top level code, and you'll see why in a minute. Top level code will be like that crime group, for example. And for type of analysis, you have to pick. For this project, I'm selecting occurrence of the code in each document. Okay. If I have activated documents, this icon will show up by default here, and you can turn it on or off. If I've activated documents, this will usually show up as well. So I click OK, and then this shows up. So what I have are the activated codes are the surveillance tools for the rows, and the columns are the crimes. Homicide, the 6 categories of crimes. By default, it shows you with a visualization, kind of either it defaults to a square right there, or you can switch it to a circle if you're more circular. But for me, I switch it to numbers, to 1, 2, 3. And I also realized I am using an older graphic screenshot, and I forgot that there's now another tool called the heat map that's added into this. I'll show this in just a second. So what it's showing here, the size indicates, okay, cell site location information, cell tower logs, was used a little bit in homicide. It was mostly used in armed robbery and drug cases. I like the numbers. I like the numbers. So the same data here. So there were 10 homicide cases using this tool. There were 24 robbery cases and 28 drug cases using this tool. Cell tower information, kind of the key point in the entire research in many ways, because that's what the policy was about. You'll notice it's missing in this graphic here for this entire category. This category of sexual misconduct was all IP address, subscriber information, bank records. So that's still reading. This is a start. It's very interesting to me. It suggests outcomes. I mean, it suggests some patterns, which from understanding American criminal law, for understanding American criminal law, a lot of this makes sense to me intuitively. So I start with the code relations browser, but I say I'm interested in these 21 cases here. If I double click on those cases, on that cell, I can then shift away from the code relations browser and go to the retrieve segments window. And then that will show me all of the retrieve segments of those 21 cases. And that will provide me a way to kind of dig a little bit deeper. So back to MAXQDA. Unfortunately, I can't really go into depth about paraphrasing right now. We have an entire week webinar focused on that. But paraphrasing, the short answer is paraphrasing is generally used for creating a literature review or for exploring your data. So when you want to inductively create a coding system. So the graphic that I showed there, I had activated these codes, right? I go to Visual Tools, I go to Code Relations Browser. It automatically said activated codes. For columns, by default, it said activated codes, but I want to choose top level code. And by default, it said intersection. I want this. I click OK. And then, excuse me, maybe snowing out, but it doesn't mean seasonal allergies aren't gone. It will automatically show me the top level codes in the system. So a top level code is any code that has a subcode. So I will turn that off and I will select crime groups. I'll click OK. And now I have the code relations browser. So here, now this data did change when we added in additional cases. So it looks a little bit different than what we had before. So display the nodes as a square, as a circle, as numbers, what I kind of like. So when we added in state cases, we ended up with 4 sexual misconduct cases that used this particular tool that weren't there before in just our federal cases. But as I said before, there's a new tool, heat map. So this provides a great combination of both numbers and visualizations. So I can visualize. The heat map is showing me the areas with the largest frequency of codes. Again, it's based on per document for each tool. And even with this tool right here, cell site location information, Notice my sexual misconduct cases, there's very few. The other options here is I can binarize the view if I wanted to, but I don't. I can show summaries. I can sum the data. I can also refresh it. I can, what else can I do? Oh, a code map. Code map. Interactive quote matrix, which is a tool I'm not going to get into right now, but I can redo it if I want. Your question is a good one. I think the answer will come through further exploration of the data. Going back to literature for sure, but this is just a start. My point was, in this instance, I knew enough about the types of crimes that it made sense to me why, for sexual misconduct cases, why, if we're dealing with a lot of child pornography cases, it would make sense that requests for IP addresses and bank records and internet subscriber information, so someone who going to an internet provider and getting the information and the logs about a particular subscriber would be the primary tools. And so you're right, sometimes it's not going to be clear, and sometimes that requires you to go deeper and deeper in the data, but we're going to do that anyways, so hopefully that'll help. Notice here I can copy the current image to the clipboard. It becomes a graphic. Again, it's not the clearest graphic, but it becomes a graphic. I chose it because that's what I was interested in looking at. I could have just, it was a quick way of doing it based on the organization. But say I wanted to, it's a good question. So let's start over and say I want to activate. Say I'm interested in these 6 codes. I'm not, but say I am. And I can go code relations browser. By default, I can select activated codes and activated codes. And that'll give me a chart where there will be repetition, but it will basically take all 6 and all 6 and show me that breakdown. For what I was doing, I kind of like, organizationally, it oftentimes makes sense to me to use the top level codes. You do not have to. I can also do this. Oh, gosh. I'm going to deactivate everything. By default, just run this. All codes. Nothing's activated, so it won't give me that choice. All codes. It's going to give me a much larger table. A much larger table. A lot of data. And it's going to cover a lot. I generally like to use the code relations browser dealing with smaller groups. You might not want to. It really is totally up to you. So let's go back to where we were. Surveillance tools. analysis, visual tools, having a day. Activated codes, top level code, currents, crime groups. I don't need that. Back to where we were. Say I'm interested in these sexual misconduct cases involving IP addresses. Before I do that, let me show you something. I want to make sure retrieve segments on document systems there. So I've got the traditional MAXQDA site, all 4 windows. I'm going to click on this, double click on it, and you'll notice, I'll just drag this away. It's on my second monitor, so I still have it. I now have 57 coded comment segments from 28 documents and 2 document groups. And I'm able to, basically, I've now got these retrieved segments just from the cases, the co-occurrence of cases that were here. Why would I want to do that? I'm trying to better understand these types of cases. I'll show a little bit more of the PowerPoint and we'll come back to right where we left off. So I see this right here, the retrieved segments. I can select the overview of retrieved segments or the smart coding tool or the word cloud from here. I'll show you each of these. Overview of the retrieved segments. If I want to view these segments in a table in the very traditional, original kind of MAXQDA model, that kind of was the only way you could do it up until MAXQDA 2020. I can use the smart coding tool. Even though I've already coded data, I find this to be a really useful tool. I'll explain this. And I can even create a word cloud of just those retrieved segments. So how did I do that? Oh, and once I click the word cloud, I can double click on a term in the word cloud and it will automatically show me all of the text there. So at the code relations browser, I've selected this group. I'm going to move the chat so that I can see. And I have, I'm going to hover over for when I don't remember what something is. The retrieve the coded segment tool, the smart coding tool, the code relations browser, going even further in depth into just these retrieved segments. I'm not going to do that. And the word cloud. And then my other option here is to code retrieve segments with a new code. So I could take all of these retrieved segments that involve both sexual misconduct and IP addresses, and I could add a code to each of those segments saying it's that combination of the two. What else do we have over here? Display the origin. Turn it on, turn it off. I like to keep it on because it shows me where the document is, and I can click on it and it'll bring it up here. Display favorite variables. I don't really need that. Display comments on coded segments. That's selected, so that's there. If there are comments on coded segments, it'll be in the right sidebar. So I click on the retrieve coded segments here. Gina, I see your question. When I get to word cloud, I'll explain that. And one way of looking at this data is to simply sort of scroll through it one by one. You'll notice here there are comments in some of these cases. say I'm reading this one here, and I'm gonna just make it up. And after reading it, I'm like, yeah, this is a really good example. I can add that as a comment, or I could add, uh, search of a hard drive if I needed to. You'll notice that as I click on each retrieved coded segment, that in the background, the document browser is switching to that exact spot, and it's showing that retrieve segment in the retrieve segment window. Okay. This is one tool. Let me show you a different one. Sorry, my voice is starting to go. Let's go to the smart coding tool. Now, the smart coding tool is technically to code with, but I like it. I like it because it provides me with a really nice view of the data. Right now, when I click on this, it is only showing me these two codes and saying that these segments are the ones that are coded for this. It's showing me all of them in one nice table. It's showing me which things have been coded. And I can click only activated codes if I want. So I'm seeing all of the codes that are activated, and I'm getting a much better sense of that data. It's a useful way of mining through your data. You may be looking for patterns. You may be trying to figure out what's going on with this data. You'll notice there are code comments on the right, and you can add additional comments to your data as you go. You can select and you can assign a new code to it if you want. And you'll notice here, I don't really need to, you'll notice here, okay, so that I click on this, and if I switch to here in a prosecution, there, it's right there. So it's automatically bringing me to that data. It's quite possible I might want to do something more. And I may very well want to, I might say, okay, this is interesting here. It isn't, but say it is. And I could create a segment. Now, I can't do it while I'm in this tool, because you'll notice, because what I was going to do is going to right click here and try to create a document memo. But MAXQDA isn't letting me do that. There are two tools in MAXQDA, the smart coding tool and the categorized paraphrase tool, which when you're in them, you're kind of locked into those tools. So, and you'll notice here, I can't create a memo just from this. It doesn't give me that as a choice. So I quit this. I'm still have the same retrieve segments, but then if I wanted to, I could right click it and insert a memo. So I have a lot of power there, a lot of possibilities. It's possible to get some kind of outline of the codes in each of the documents individually. Where is it? Hang on a second. I believe if I click on this filter, it's just going to show the current document and the codes that are, nope, it's not. Hang on a second. Display codes in activated documents only. I've got several documents that are activated, but if I had just one document activated and I selected this little icon it would limit it to just the codes that are in each of those documents. So that's sort of the answer to that, Rebecca. What you're not getting the clean version of it right here because of the fact that there are so many documents. There are 28 documents that are activated. So that's another little hint here. Remember, it says 58 coded segments, 28 documents. 28 documents activated right there. 2 codes activated. Remember, we got this from, oh, it's already open. We got this from this code relations browser. I would expect 28 documents there. So that's exactly what's activated. There's no doubt that a dual monitor setup when you're doing stuff like this is really helpful. And what I'm sitting here, you're watching this webinar based on a 27-inch display, plus I have a 24-inch display right next to me. So I have a command center. So we had the smart coding tool. It's a really useful function when you're sort of wanting to see that data and make better sense of it. It's not the end, but it is a useful tool. I also mentioned, now this would bring up a code relations browser just of all the codes of these retrieved 28 documents. That would sort of narrow it down even further, but to give a deeper view of it. But I'm going to skip that now because it gets too complex. We only have so much time. The word cloud tool was right here. So this was the word cloud of this. You asked, what if I want to get rid of a term? Well, what I can do here, I don't want it. I right click it, add it to the stop list. When you're doing a word cloud, usually you need to add and edit a stop list of terms. There's a standard stop list, but you want to add, you want to kind of further customize it. What's interesting here is there are 81 hits on the word address. If I click it, I don't even have to double click it, just click it. It brings up the search results. And you'll notice here, it is showing me from these 28 documents, the uses of that word address, where it appears. Now, like IP address, that's something I'm interested in. This one I'm probably not interested in. But what's useful about these search results is you can either further refine your data and you can potentially you can code these search results, or you can create a new code, and you can select you can say, I don't care about these documents. And so when you code them, you will skip those documents. So it's a stop. It's a real useful tool. It's not just the visualization that you might use in a PowerPoint presentation. I've used in other webinars my dog sniff one that I probably spent 2 hours cleaning up to get that to look the way I wanted it to. But for me here, this is more of a tool that's allowing you to further dig into your data. Showing you the context of your data. Regarding the word cloud, if I group some words to an expression, I gotta be honest, Eva, right now off the top of my head, I'm not certain. I'm sure it's possible. Um, or are you saying you've added them as a term you wanted to? I'd have to spend some time thinking about that. If you want to email me, I'm glad to try to work you through it. So that's one tool. What we've done though is what we're doing is we're systematically mining this data. We're going deeper and deeper into it. We're looking to get a better sense of what this data looks like. There's another tool that you can use. It's the simple code configurations. And what's interesting here is what this tool is doing was I just selected these particular, I took this case, the same crime, the sexual misconduct cases, and I added in these tools. And what it's doing is showing me, oh, sorry, I have 11 documents that involve IP addresses and sexual misconduct. I have 6 documents that involve subscriber information, IP addresses, and sexual misconduct. I have 1 document that has bank, subscriber, IP addresses, and sexual misconduct. Sorry, I'm not in MAXQDA. With this, I can click on any of those cells and it'll allow me to go into it. Let me show you where that tool is. Simple code configurations is analysis. Code configurations, simple code configurations. I'm going to say sexual misconduct. I'm going to say IP addresses. It lets me whether or not I'm interested in documents or segments, and if I'm differentiating these by document groups. I do have 2 document groups here, state and federal cases. So, but I'll initially just do it like this. This one's a little bit more boring because you know what? I'm only looking at the 28 cases. All right. So this is like, wait a second, that's not giving me everything. When that happens, I reset, no documents are activated. Code configurations, simple code configurations. Bingo, looks a little better. It's showing me the breakdown here. I click on this, or I've got these 15 here. It's doing the exact same thing now. It's showing me those segments. Oh, I'm sorry. There's actually 2 windows here. Forgot. The 55 coded segments from 27 documents are showing up there. But what I'm also seeing here is the detailed view of the use of the codes in each data. So this is another way of mining the data. I can view this graphically if I want. It'll enable me to, that's not really helpful, I guess. Code configurations, yeah. What if I do this one? I don't use this tool a ton. Yeah, that's very useful. It looks like art. So let's go deeper. I still want to know more about the cases that involve this code combination. Why is it that these cases involving sexual misconduct, child pornography, utilize one particular type of tool? Well, we've coded segments involving this code, but how can we easily summarize them looking for similarities and differences? This is where the summary grid and summary table come into play. This is a tool which we will actually spend an entire week on. Next week, I believe. One of my favorite tools. So I'm going to give you the short version of this now. But the summary grid lets you see all of your codes and documents in which you have coded segments. Provides an easy way to create summaries of the materials that you've coded, and then to transform those into a tabular form, into a table, to see the overall results. So we're going to begin by activating the documents that contain the code sexual misconduct in the final version. I renamed the code, simplified. To do that, I simply right-click on that code in the code system, and I select Activate Documents Containing this code. It's a very quick way of accessing a certain set of codes, of documents. If I need to see a combination of activated codes, I would probably use I would transform my codes into document variables, and then I'd create an expression to do that. We'll go over that in greater depth in the mixed methods session. So I right-click, I activate the documents containing this code. I then will see a summary grid, and it'll look like this. And each cell in the grid will begin with just where there is a case that involves this particular code. It will have a blue dot, and there won't be any green around it. And I will see a coded segment, fairly long piece of text, and then I will click into this cell and I will write a brief summary of that coded segment. The idea of the summary grid tool, this is sort of a sneak peek to next week, is to take longer coded segments and reduce them into their simple points. I've been showing you examples of this throughout the webinar series. We've got the infamous historical exoneration summary table. I think I showed you that last week, or I don't know. I've showed it many times. It's one of my favorites. And as soon as I click anything in this tool, it will churn from blue to provide a green background. And the whole theory of the summary grid is to simply make sure every cell where there's a blue dot has a green background, that I've summarized all of those, and then I can turn them magically into a summary table. Using the summary table tool, I can actually see the document name, I can add document variables, I can have multiple coded summaries, creating a really interesting table of it. I can export these summary tables as table documents. I can create a max map of summaries. I can export the out of MAXQDA to Word, Excel, or to a web page. I can save them in a free memo. Let's see. Excuse me. Analysis, summary grid. I'm interested in these cases, right? Just activated that document, that code. I right-click, activate documents containing this code. I have 40 documents. That's what I'm supposed to. I go to the summary grid. Now, a lot of these are already coded. You'll notice here, I click on this cell. So here is what was coded. This was the coded comment that was there. And I wrote a summary. So pretend I didn't do it yet. So this is the way it would start. It's blue with nothing there. I click on it. I read it. I summarize it. I reduced it from a paragraph to a couple of words. I go through each one and I type it. The second I type anything, it's not green, it's now green. I go through all the documents where this occurs. I'm not going to bother with it right now, and I summarize it. When I'm done, I can go to the summary table tool here or the summary table tool there. It's the exact same thing. And I've already done this, but I create a new summary table. I say I'm interested in sexual misconduct, an IP address. I've got it only for activated documents because I really don't want a table of 231 documents when only 40 of them involve this combo. I can add in document variables, so I could add in year, shepherd's year, court. I could do whatever I have there if I want. I click OK. It creates a new summary table. I can rename it. I can reorganize it. I can decide that I don't really even need the name of the case. I do, or this, and I can right click and hide it. And I now have a table. It's not complete. This one, so there was a sample table. A table that shows me the breakdown of all of these. I thought I did IP address. Select columns. No, I apparently didn't include that for there. I thought I did. I can create as many tables as I want. Ultimately, my goal is I want to reduce all of my data. Here's a summary table. Summary table. Different project, but just to give you an example, which we'll go over next week. All these cases involve police misconduct. Here are the forms of police misconduct. I have summarized these coded segments, reduced them into a table that provides an incredibly powerful form of analysis. I can look and exactly see all of the things going on in the case. I can create I don't know where this code name mental health as a life impact came from. I obviously screwed something up there, but I can even create a max map of the summaries. That is literally just a start. When I think of systematically analyzing coded data, I have not covered all the tools. We would have to spend hours covering all the tools. I'll show you that in a second. Each tool in each project will require different tools. You may want to be using completely different things. You might be interested in document portraits. You might be interested in what part of your data is coded. It's all going to differ on terms of your needs. But this is an example, though, of sort of systematically, step-by-step, exploring a segment of data. And notice, in that project, there's a whole lot of other stuff coded. This is just showing you the process for one code, if you will, that sexual misconduct code. I would want to continue to redo this over and over again. There's probably 5 different sets of summary tables that we're in the process of still creating here. What's interesting is we start, we're coding data, but then we're further reducing it. But the summary data tool can also be used in the other way to create meta summaries of documents. Chapter 8, I think, Kukul's chapter in the book is a remarkable example of using a summary table for analysis in a way completely different than the way I use it. That's what's cool about it. Each project will be different. The visuals of the maps are useful, but however, I do want to point out existing project. It's not always helpful with a lot of data. So for example, Max Maps, code model, single code model summaries. Watch what's going to happen here. Actually, that's not terrible, I guess. But the more data you have, the more challenging it gets. All right, folks, closing off.